All right, great. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And what we're going to do is have our panelists introduce themselves first in just about 5 minutes or so, talk about their experience. And we're going to go ahead and let Niels start us off.
Thanks, Jennifer, and welcome to everybody to this chat today. My name is Niels Marquardt. I'm currently a diplomat in residence at Lewis & Clark, but I'm very happy to be working with and connected to anybody, really anywhere, that wants to talk about working overseas. I was a language major at Lewis & Clark and went on to get my master's degree in business, international business, kind of, a long time ago, but not in a pandemic by any means. But that was my route to trying to become competitive for working overseas. I ended up spending over 30 years on 5 continents, most of that as a foreign service officer in France, Germany, Thailand, Australia, and 7 countries in Africa, as well as Washington, D.C. And then I came back to Portland. I also spent 4 years running the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia after I retired from the Foreign Service in Sydney. So that's, I think one of the things we're going to be talking about is what is your skill set? What might you do to enhance it or to showcase it? In my case, I built on a basis of foreign languages, got a business background, and then I was poised to either join the Foreign Service if I was lucky enough to be invited, or go into international business, or potentially work for an international NGO. I got my first choice and didn't have to pursue those other routes. But let me stop there and turn the mic over to Ashley Emerson to talk about her journey.
Great, thanks, Niels. And we're going to ask you all to also share your journey. So I hope that's okay. We'd love to hear from you too, get to know you more so that we can, just have more of a discussion as we move forward. So my name's Ashley Emerson. I work here in Portland as the program director for an organization called Health and Harmony. We focus on planetary health. So during the pandemic, we've been really focused on our frontline staff internationally, preparing medical centers and doing system strengthening to prepare and stave off the effects of the pandemic in the countries we work in Indonesia and Madagascar. We're launching programs in Brazil in the next 2 weeks. So we've been really busy from that angle, but because we also work in conservation, we've been working on coming up with creative stimulus packages for the rainforest, finding that this is a really great opportunity to, be able to address the climate crisis through planetary health in an effort to, again, just minimize the shocks and impacts that will inevitably bring. So how did I get to Health and Harmony? Well, I started, really by studying international development as an undergraduate and grad student. That brought me to a number of countries overseas to begin to figure out, what area I might want to work in. I spent a lot of my time working and researching maternal and infant health in particular, economic development, education, and looking at some of the different kind of ministries and infrastructures in low resource post-crisis settings that needed bolstering and support. And then after graduating, I started a career as a grant writer for a large foundation, which was just an awesome skill to have. I had done some writing and research in college, but I didn't necessarily know how to write technically, and that skill has been really helpful for me. So any job I've had, I've always been part of the grants department, and I currently lead that at Health and Harmony. I at the same time began working on building a grassroots nonprofit. We eventually ended up working in 10 different low resource post-crisis settings, and spent most of my time focused on building out public health infrastructure in Healy and Sierra Leone, West Africa a lot. We did quite a bit of work around economic development, education for women and girls in Bangladesh and Jamaica. And it was just incredible. I found myself traveling a lot, working with some of the most brilliant people I'd ever met in my life. really focused on, community-led, community-driven approaches to international development work. And so doing assessments around, what are the greatest needs? How does the community shape and design them? And most of the time, how do I play Robin Hood trying to find funding and resources to be able to advance those programs? And I would say kind of one of the best opportunities I had was seeing the impact of that work in Sierra Leone and Liberia during the Ebola epidemic, and just how very basic public health and education infrastructure could kind of support and protect those communities that had access to those resources. From there, after about 6 years, we had brought on another nonprofit to help fund our international development work that was focused on foreign diplomacy. I think I maybe got a little burnt out from travel, and had been moving around quite a bit, and so decided to go back to school for public health, shift into domestic public health to build out my skill set. I felt that I didn't have a lot of background in epidemiology, GIS, kind of some of these really important skills that can be helpful in this international work. And so started working in early cancer detection education for young adults. So a lot of that work was focused on epidemiology, behavior change, and a big portion of it, as you can imagine, was psychology and marketing. And I did that for about 2 years and was pretty bored compared to the life I had had before. And so by the time I moved out here to Portland about 3 years ago, got back into the international field, but was really seeking a way that I could focus my work on the climate crisis at this intersection of human and environmental health. And there happened to be a pretty remarkable nonprofit here working on that. So since then, I've been working with Health and Harmony. Outside of that work, something that was really helpful was volunteering for boards throughout my career, and it was really fun, just being part of different organizations, leadership, figuring out, how to fundraise, how to restructure. A lot of board work can be, either fundraising, or it can be roll up your sleeves and be really hands-on. And so I thought those experiences were really helpful. And then just working in small startups. And so I worked in a lot of LGBTQ efforts in New England, focused on, mobilizing the creative arts to help build LGBTQ community, which in turn resulted in really awesome economic benefits for the communities that we worked in. And so it was fun to always work in these startup arenas that I was really passionate about, and we just had a total blast doing it. So that's kind of the background on my experience and how I got to where I am today, and I hope it's a little bit helpful. So I'd love to turn it over to Sam to share more about his background. And I think you're muted.
Sam.
There we go. So I didn't even decide that I wanted to work overseas till I was probably about 29 years old. It was my first year of my master's in urban planning program at Portland State, and had attended a presentation by a returned Peace Corps volunteer about some work he'd done in Yemen, and it really inspired me to look into it further. Ended up at the end of my master's program volunteering for the Peace Corps, spending 2 years in the Solomon Islands and sort of a very isolated place in the South Pacific, and had a great 2 years, really caught the bug at that point. Returned to Oregon with my wife. She got her master's in public health. We thought we had a pretty good pairing of being able to go back overseas and looking for jobs, and sent out lots of resumes to a lot of jobs and didn't get many positive responses, which I think you guys can relate to. Got one positive response, but that was to go back to the South Pacific, to another isolated island, and we decided not to take them up on that offer. But then I sort of did some research, found out about the Foreign Service. They were giving the exam on a November morning in Eugene. I thought it would probably be raining, so I took a shot and ended up joining the Foreign Service, and spent 20 years working in Africa and Southeast Europe, in a dozen or 2 dozen different countries, depending on how you measure that, and had a great career, did amazing things, thought I helped a lot. It was really rewarding, and then decided to retire because of sort of family situation. We really, you know, my story is somewhat different just because I started late. I almost accidentally got into the Foreign Service. It wasn't something I had plotted or planned on. I think having my master's helped me in sort of my ability to reason and learn and think and pass the variety of exams that you have to pass to get into the Foreign Service. But I've also, in the process of my career, met a number of other people who also have, you know, sort of started out where you guys are starting out and ended up working overseas. I think you look at public health, such as Ashley, but over the course of my career, I've met many people working in Africa and HIV/AIDS, water and sanitation, and most of them originated or started their careers in public health schools, like Ashley, getting their masters in public health, and then concentrating that master's on overseas work, international work, and building in overseas experience as part of that master's study. Another large population of people working overseas that I worked with were refugee and relief specialists. They were a bit more varied. They were people who had often shown up, happened to be in a place where there was an emergency, started out as either a volunteer or somebody working very low on the totem pole, and worked their way up. I think of the country director for International Rescue Committee in Ethiopia, who started at IRC. He was a wildlife guide in Kenya and had somebody on one of his guiding tours that worked for IRC. He sort of mentioned he was looking for somebody at a different line, and this guy happened to have a low-level job, and he ended up working his way up, working in Somalia, then in Ethiopia, and had built himself quite a career. And the other area there is sort of the U.S. government outside of the Foreign Service, USAID, where they hire people, and they've got a very sort of standard hiring process for the government, but they're not just looking for area specialists, they're also looking for budget people, they're looking for public affairs people, they're looking for all sorts of management administrative people to do HR and to do all those kind of things as well. So it's possible to find work overseas that doesn't necessarily mean you're an area expert on public health or on relief or anything like that. I guess if I wanted to sort of look at your situation and try to figure out what, you know, there's the dilemma of trying to find a job overseas. In order to get a job overseas, they want you to have experience overseas. But in order to get that experience overseas, you need to find work overseas. And so I think that's the ultimate struggle, and trying to find that initial experience overseas, whether it's through Peace Corps, whether it's through interning, whether it's through volunteering. I was working on the European migration crisis in 2015, 2016 in Southeastern Europe and the Balkans. And half the people working on that issue were volunteering. They were people who had been traveling in Europe, doing a gap year or something like that, heard about the crisis, came to Serbia or came to Croatia, and just started volunteering. There were all sorts of volunteer communities and groups working there at that point, and they were from all different European countries, and these people got this excellent experience, and some of them moved on and became professionals. And so there is that possibility. You know, that's another way to break in, and you know, that's sort of the way you get it started, is by getting that experience overseas. Having the education, having the master's, I think really helps if you want to go that route, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And so I'll stop there. And I think, Jennifer, you're going to have something to ask them.
Yeah, so at this point, we would love to just hear a 1-minute sort of your elevator pitch about who you are, what interests you in this panel, and what you're hoping to gain from this discussion. I want to acknowledge that all of us have really different backgrounds right now, different levels of experience, but I think that that's what makes these conversations so valuable. So give us a little taste of who you are and what you're looking for. Shannon, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. So yes, my name's Shannon. I currently work at Medical Teams International as one of the recruiters. And my background experience is my undergrad, I have 2 bachelors in environmental science and gender studies. And then I lived overseas for 2.5 years in Latin America. But during my college experience, I traveled primarily throughout Latin America and then Asia, doing short-term mission trips. And came back, found it was really hard to find a job even with my bilingual and 2.5 years experience. Finally found a job. I've been trying to work my way up. It's not right now leading in any sense, in any close seeming future, especially with COVID, toward international work again with this organization overseas. And so I feel I'm at this point where I have experience, but it's still not quite enough to push me into that next level. So I feel like I'm hitting into that glass screen of like, is it the master's degree? And I've been taking online classes and getting certified and training and emergency response and all these things and networking and talking. I just feel like nothing is moving on how do I break that ceiling into the next category of like, I have more than entry level, but it's not quite enough to be junior level. And so I'm at that line of that's what I'm hoping to get at is, do I need to take my PTO and then go get experience volunteering in Africa because I don't have experience yet in Africa, or, and I'm taking language classes on the side. So I'm just like, what is that next thing I need to do to push myself into that next category?
Shannon, what's your dream job?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. I've been playing with public health, but I really do want to work in programs. Right now I'm in the HR department. And so I at least know department wise, I would like to work in programs, boots on the ground, behavior change, direct contact with clients and beneficiaries. So the closer to the field I can get and the further away from the office would be great. And I know there's a lot of ways that could look, and I'm open to a lot of different suggestions and ideas. So I have a lot of varied interests, but definitely client facing.
Great. Thank you so much. Jennifer, could we go over to you?
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, so I was laughing at the mention of the International Rescue Committee in Ethiopia because that was actually my first job overseas. I was a program officer there. I wonder if it's the same country director. It was a long time ago.
David?
No, this was Art back in 2001, 2002. So
Okay.
it's a
David
small
was an
world.
excellent guy. I
Yeah,
like that,
that's one thing that I've certainly found is it's a small world out there. And full disclosure, I'm married to Ted Kulangosky and heard that he was doing this webinar and I decided to crash it. So we're in different rooms. But in fact, I'm in my dream job right now. I'm the country director for Peace Corps in Indonesia. And I'm back in Oregon because my husband and I have been evacuated for a period of time until it's safe to return. So I'm actually participating because I mentor a lot of Peace Corps volunteers, and many of them want to work overseas when they complete their Peace Corps service or when they're evacuated and suddenly complete their Peace Corps service. And so I'm always looking for new ideas and information that I can share in that capacity. So I'm hoping that some of the experiences that you are sharing can help me to pass along some insight to volunteers who are now back in the US or those that finish their service under normal circumstances. So thank you. I'm happy to be joining today.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you. And feel free to jump in if we're talking about the Peace Corps specifically and you feel like you have some experience. I can answer that question. Please feel free to jump in later. Sharon, I'd love to go to you next.
Well, first off, I need to apologize for not doing my pre-work. I turned in the draft of my PhD dissertation this morning, so I was just very busy.
Congratulations, that is huge.
That's
Zoom
a
clap.
big deal.
Awesome.
Ashley knows my story well. So I come in, my PhD is in animal welfare and conservation science. My undergrad is in engineering. I've been in engineering, that's my first career, and it's still my bread and butter. So I have a bread and butter that I've maintained through my master's degree and my PhD to give me that fallback. Plus it was a career I enjoyed. But I have become connected with GlobalPDX and Health and Harmony through the Oregon Zoo and our partnership and the marrying of coming in with a conservation objective and learning more about the human perspective. So right now, I'm looking at this as sort of a gift of an open time frame to figure out how I really want to apply myself. I did a lot of independent travel in my previous career for fun, but also I taught engineering in Thailand, and then have been going back to Asia. My species of study is the Asian elephant, which has a lot of conservation issues and very strong human connections. I most recently have been spending time in Borneo, supporting some of our work there. And then last fall attended the IUCN Asian Elephant Specialist Group in Borneo, which was really a big milestone for me, representing the zoo and getting an invitation to attend that meeting. So I defend on June 10th and have some work to do afterwards, of course. And I'm trying to just keep an open mind about what I want to do next. I do whatever I want, whatever I do with my science, I want it to be very applied and empowering for the people who are involved, and to have more direct benefit to the individual animals and the species. I don't know, the path that will take. My personal path is quite a patchwork quilt, but I'm going to try to apply all these different skills that I've gathered into something meaningful. So it's pretty open.
What's your dream job?
Ooh, my dream job is a little more project-based, actually. My dream job, I'm looking at the qualities of my dream job, which are to be working on a team, in a team environment, empowering people to, not an academic way, but in a learning way. Like I think about even doing animal behavior, teaching youth what they're actually seeing in the animals that they're sharing space with, not in a heavy statistics way, but in a more personal way, using the science to help with conservation and engagement with people. Say, for example, in a conflict situation, when villagers decide to name the animals and behave differently with them, it's kind of a win-win situation. I feel like I've traveled enough to have a decent cultural awareness that allows me to be less judgmental. I think there's one organization there is one organization that works in the world's most impoverished zoos to try to make improvements and help the people learn what they need to do in a non-judgmental way. And that is something that I'd be really interested in. It's animal welfare, but it's also empowering for those people, because most people, I believe, most people are really good people, and good people can do harmful things unintentionally and out of desperation. And that's kind of where I want to look if I was to make some sort of pursuit in improving welfare. So I do want to have the conservation and the welfare aspects. But my brain is so tired right now, I can't even think of the name of the organization.
No, that was great. That was great.
I'll get there. I'll recover.
Thank you. Let's go to Deanna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deanna. I moved to Portland about 2 years ago to start my master's. So I am working on my master's in public health right now for health management and policy. My background, I've worked the past 4-ish years in healthcare technology. So mostly the for-profit business stuff. My bachelor's degree, I got a bachelor's of science in chemistry and business management. And moving forward, as I'm going to end up graduating with my master's next year, I'm looking into an international career and what that entails. And so I'm really curious to hear everyone else's experience so far and what that looks like. I think I'm running into the same anxiety and nervousness that Sam was talking about, where most of the jobs that I'm interested in say that you have to have international experience already, which I don't have. I haven't traveled abroad for work yet, just for tourism. So yeah, I'm really interested in hearing everyone's perspective and what everyone's path so far.
Great, thank you so much. And finally, over to Ted.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ted Kulongoski, and as my wife Jennifer already introduced us, I'm a native Oregonian, so I grew up in the Eugene area, and eventually finished university with a biology degree, and that sent me overseas with the Peace Corps as a Peace Corps volunteer to Togo in West Africa, where I lived out in the quintessential Peace Corps experience village with the mud huts and the thatched roofs and what a lot of people think of. But as some of the other people here who have lived in different parts of the world know, that is just one aspect of living out in a rural community in different parts of the world. So I did my Peace Corps tour doing basically health, water, sanitation. Peace Corps was a lot different in those days, so the programming was, the title of the project was Appropriate Technology, which included latrines and water and reforestation and mud cook stoves and public health stuff as well. So it was kind of a collection of a lot of different topics that you could get involved in. That was the bug that kind of got me going. And so from there, I just spent time kind of bopping back and forth from living in the US and doing odd jobs here to finding small volunteer or intern jobs or with some small local NGO or some group that was working overseas. So I did that for about 10 years. And then when I got to about 30, I decided I needed to do something more serious with my career in terms of actually making it happen rather than just hoping for that job that was described here where, oh, I'm on, oh, you work for that, oh, you need somebody, oh, and I work in and I get my dream, and start working up. That didn't, never happened for me, but so I went back to school, got my my master's degree in international development technology and engineering. So I'm a civil engineer with a master's in environmental engineering, and my first degree was in biology. So I kind of am a water and sanitation kind of guy, as they say. And so the one thing that I would point out, and maybe we can have a discussion about this a little bit, was that what I've seen over the last 20 years is that as far as water and sanitation goes, I can't say for everything, but for water and sanitation, jobs have really moved away from field work to being much more managers and people that sit in offices and have budgets and run programs, because there are now lots of NGOs and a lot of local staff and local people who are skilled now and are doing all the field work parts of it. And they can do it so much better than any foreigner coming in who doesn't understand the language, the culture, and all the nuances that go on. So I have found that, unfortunately, field work is becoming less and less available. And sitting in an office at a computer seems to be much more the norm. So people may agree or disagree with me on that, but that's one topic that I want to bring up. And so currently my wife and I, this is another aspect for everyone to think about, is am I going overseas by myself? Am I going over with a partner? Am I going over with a family? And these are all serious things to start thinking about ahead of time, because that makes it quite a bit more challenging. My wife and I both, Jennifer and I, are both professionals. So trying to find work in the same country at the same time, oh my gosh, it's pretty crazy. So luckily I'm somebody who's a jack of all trades. And so she can find the international job that has the benefits for, bringing over as an accompanied post. And then I can join in and try to pick up work somewhere along the way, which has always happened, but not always as timely as we had always hoped. So there have been years where I've sat there, well, places where we've lived where I've sat for over a year, trying to find something to do other than doing some volunteer work and just trying to get out and connect and network in the community. But getting paid work has sometimes been very challenging. So I just point that out. And in reference to that specifically, I am currently working in Indonesia as a foreign service officer at the consulate because I can't work on the local economy based on there's no bilateral work agreement. So I cannot get a job in Indonesia because I cannot get a work visa if I want to live there with my wife. So the alternative
Are you one of the consular associates, or?
I am. I'm a EPAP. I'm a
Yep.
expanded professional position. So
Yep.
I was able to get in on that and do basically the same. I sit in the political economic section
okay.
of the consulate, and I'm basically do everything. There's only 2 of us. So there's the chief of the section, and then there's me. So he's been pretty excited to get somebody in there to help him out and do technical writing, reports, cables, representational events, all the work that we do at the consulate. So now I've shot my career off into a completely and utterly different direction than where I'd been before. So that's it.
Flexibility helps, huh?
Oh my gosh, yeah. If you just go into your career thinking this is what I want to do and this is the only way it's going to work, you're going to be struggling to try to find meaningful work through a whole period of time. But one other thing I could mention is that UN volunteers is another great opportunity for people to get overseas and get that experience, that overseas experience that so many organizations are asking for. And I worked for the UN for a short-term contract, and I was amazed at the number of people that were in those offices. They were not just all technical people. There were public affairs people who are doing media outreach. They need social media experts. There were lawyers that were in there helping out with human rights. So it is not just, you don't have to get one of these health, education, water and sanitation type of degrees in order to work overseas. There are lots of international jobs that are available in the developing context for other people.
Absolutely.
And UNV pays better than Peace Corps.
Oh, much better.
So thank you guys all so much for telling us a little about yourselves. Before we dive into the next section of sort of this session, I just want to note that sometimes these conversations go long, but we want to be really sensitive to all of your schedules. So if you have something, a hard leave time at 1 o'clock, that's totally fine. Please note that you can reach out to me at communications@globalpdx.org if you want to follow up with any of our panelists. And if you want your email address to be shared just with attendees for networking purposes, please also send me that. I won't share your email unless you specifically tell me to, but we do love to create this sort of strong networking cohesion, and I think this is a great group. So please remember to do that if you have to log off early. So the next part of our session plan is each of our panelists have come up with a question that they think would be great to have each of you answer, which gets to the core of your experience and also your goals. We estimate each of these questions taking about 10 minutes, and then we have a couple things to wrap up, which is why I'm anticipating us going perhaps 10 minutes over. So I'd love to turn it over to Sam, who's going to introduce our first question for all of you.
Okay, and my question's probably more targeted at Shannon and Deanna and Sharon, because I think that Jennifer and Ted may not be doing this currently. But I'd just be interested to hear sort of how many informational interviews have you done in the last month or 3 months, and what were the results? Did you find more contacts to talk to? Did you get good experience or advice, that sort of thing? So just I'll hold it at that, and why don't Shannon, you can start since you haven't talked in a while.
Yeah, in the past, I've been using this remote working from home time as a good time to connect for interpersonal interviews, because I don't have to like step out of the office and all of that, right? Probably 5 or 6, at least like 1 a week, if not 2. And I think it was good information, but again, I feel like it's a lot of talk of like, okay, but how do I break this glass ceiling right now? And I have gotten good contacts, and I feel like a lot of people keep telling me like, oh, you need your master's, or you need your master's, or you need your master's. And I would like to get my master's at some point, but I also know now, like looking at jobs and just like, I am working in an international nonprofit, like I'm in it. I'm not like in the field in it, but I'm still in the organization in it. And then you run into the like, oh, well, a master's degree still isn't enough if you still don't have the experience. And my experience still doesn't seem to be quite enough. And so just this balance of like, well, what is enough? Like, I can get the master's degree, and I've been pointed towards public health and social work. I have had people tell me to not do a master's in international development because it makes you too much of a generalist. And then other people say, oh, no, but being a generalist is great. And it's just a lot of conflicting advice. And so again, I'm at a point where I'm like feeling like, what are those action steps that I can take actually besides doing these online classes? And especially in COVID, right? When you can't physically take action steps. And so they've been helpful, maybe narrowing things down, but again, that clear path of at least like, what is one thing I can do right now to kind of start chipping away at that ceiling that I'm butting into right now.
How about Deanna? Have you started on down that path?
Yeah, so I'm working and going to school at the same time, so it's kind of hard to find some time for informational interviews. But when I started my master's program, I set the goal to have at least one a month. I've been following that pretty regularly. Thankfully, I've had the time to do so. But mostly I have gotten really great advice, actually, of what classes I should be taking in my master's program. A lot of the advice I've gotten are to really define my hard skills. It's really important, of course, in your master's program to understand the philosophy and everything behind public health, but being able to use STATA or R or have like moving around statistical data is really important. So that's the advice I've gotten. And the other piece I've gotten are organizations to look at. So I'm not an Oregon native, so it's been really helpful to hear more about organizations that are in the Oregon area if I plan to stay here, or even speaking to some professionals on the East Coast where I actually come from, and learning more about organizations over there too.
Great. And Sharon, I mean, it doesn't sound like you've really had time to do any informational interviewing recently.
No, but I've been keeping it. I'm a big believer in information interviews. I advised a lot of young engineers and technical writers to do that because it's a low risk way of getting your foot in the door a little bit and asking questions without having someone be able to respond that there's no openings. So I think it's it's almost better to have those conversations when there are no openings, and you can just say, I know you don't have any openings, but I'd like to have a conversation with you. So although I haven't been doing it, I do plan on doing more of that when I finish this phase and can move on to the next journey.
Yeah. And are you gonna sort of create an actual plan to do that, or are you?
Yes. Yeah. So what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm going to write down my ideal job description before I start looking at jobs, both from the qualities that I want in that position, and then also my goals, sort of my accomplishments that I want to propose. And I've been having conversations over the years about that, and I have been getting involved in some way, and I have a really good network in this area of science. Having said that, the world's changing a little bit, and so I'm trying to look at it as a gift with an open, kind of an open a blank canvas right now. I think I need to do that, and I see some benefit in doing that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
If I may just jump in, I feel like there's I would be remiss not to catch this moment of seeing all of you who have such fantastic expertise, whether it is in, should someone go into a master's program if they're an undergraduate, or should someone go into work overseas or in a specific sector. So if any of you are interested in going on our GlobalPDX list of people that someone could come in contact with you and say, hey, I'd love an informational interview about X, which is your area of expertise as noted by GlobalPDX. I think building that out could be such a great resource for us to foster. So yeah, keep that in mind as we're going forward. And if you want to be one of those interviewees, shoot me over a message after this. I'd love to turn it over now to Ashley. Oh, sorry, to Niels, who has the next question for us.
Okay, now you can hear me. I'd prepared for a different group of people. I mean, I think you have more answers than, I mean, I spend most of my time at college, at Lewis and Clark College and at other colleges talking to students about what they might be thinking about beyond graduation. You guys are all way beyond that. So I'd like uh, to, you know, and I think 5 out of the 9 of us are former Peace Corps volunteers. So which is something I end up talking a lot about, the benefits potentially post Peace Corps service of getting, you know, your education at least subsidized, your further education. But I'd like to ask Jennifer, because I'm just trying to imagine the situation that you're in with all these evacuated volunteers who didn't quite finish their service and the amount of advice that you must be giving. I mean, what are you finding to be effective for that cohort of, I mean, it's a pretty difficult situation, I would imagine. So what's working and, you know, what's absolutely not working?
Yeah, great questions. And I'm going to clarify before I talk about Peace Corps, because this really is a shameless plug as well for joining the Peace Corps, is that even though I've been a staff member for 6 years, I myself I'm not a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I chose a different route, which was a fellowship program that brought me overseas. And in fact, it was that job with the International Rescue Committee in Ethiopia. So I think just to go back one moment, just to say, I do think there's a lot to be said for just getting your foot in the door in an overseas position. And oftentimes it's not a paid position. But Peace Corps, in my opinion, is the absolute best way to get that experience. And there are a lot of benefits. May not look like there are a lot of monetary benefits, but in fact there are, if you actually look at the amount of money it costs you to live in the United States, and then you look at how well you're taken care of overseas by Peace Corps and the kind of language skills and experience that you get, it's really unparalleled. So in answer to your question just about the returned Peace Corps volunteers around the world right now, it's obviously just a tough environment for everyone. But what I'm seeing, we have an education program in Indonesia, just one sector. So our volunteers are doing 3 things right now. They're applying to teach somewhere in the United States or to return to Indonesia as teachers with private schools and organizations. Or they're applying to graduate school, many of them, because now they're eligible for the Coverdell Fellows program, which offers a lot of support with tuition and other costs of going to school. This is a great opportunity. Every one of the 7,000 volunteers who was evacuated has eligibility now for that program, and many universities are honoring scholarships and things like that. And then the third is that they're given a choice if they want to reinstate at their original country of service. When the time comes, they'll be able to do that. So I've been doing a lot of writing of recommendation letters for our returned Peace Corps volunteers, as you can imagine. I would say that some of them are looking for experience in short-term temporary positions, working with the COVID-19 pandemic efforts. And so that's a whole new segment of jobs that have opened up in the United States and overseas. So that's also just some place to be looking, but it's certainly not the easiest environment. And I would say that sometimes this is when Peace Corps shines, because it's hard to get jobs in the US. But if you're committed to going through the application process and the selection process with Peace Corps, then it might be the right thing for you. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I mean, that's the message. I was a volunteer in Rwanda many years ago, and I totally agree with you that sort of the conventional things that you can pick up off the shelf, as it were, you know, becoming a Peace Corps volunteer and proving yourself in, you know, living in a mud hut or otherwise, as Ted did. I mean, there's nothing like it. And so many of the people that I encountered over 30 years overseas who, you know, it's all about where you are when an opportunity pops up, and quite often that's what does it. But again, I'm talking to a group of people who are beyond that conversation.
All right, let's go over to Ashley, who has a couple thoughts on Well, actually, I'm not sure if you've changed your mind on what you want to speak on, Ashley. I'll just let you take
I
over.
have, yeah. No, it's true. I was going to talk more about kind of internships. We work with a lot of interns at Health and Harmony, and there's a big transition to offer more equitable internships where people are actually getting paid. I remember, when I was trying to start my career, I was oftentimes paying for my own experience, whether it was to travel and do that. And that was just kind of an accepted norm to be able to get into the field in the industry. I think because it is service oriented, that can be expected. That's hard, if you are also working full time to pay for your own education experience. But yeah, so just to say that is a complicated challenge that many of us face. One thing I wanted to just put out there is there's a lot of emphasis on this overseas experience and a lot of emphasis on, Deanna, what you talked about, these really important skills. And I found I think that's one of the best ways to be able to kind of break through that ceiling that you were talking about, is being able to offer some of those skills. Maybe even initially as a volunteer for various organizations, to say, I'm really good at statistics. Do you have a data set you're sitting on that I could help analyze? I'm really good at comms and marketing. Do you have a campaign you're looking to launch that I could support? So I think offering some of those skills as you're developing them can be helpful for building out the resume. But in terms of the overseas experience, it's a complicated one. And I think, a lot of what we're seeing during this pandemic, but also this being, kind of a harbinger of the climate crisis, is that international travel, though important, is a major contributor to the climate crisis. I think it's only 6% of people on the whole planet have ever stepped foot on an airplane. So it's a privilege too. And so the fact that we always emphasize this so much is again, it's very complicated. So I wonder, what ways we could be creative to gain some of that international experience virtually during this time. And again, I'll look to, Jennifer, Niels, Sam, Ted, I look to you all, because I think it's an apt time for us to be developing some of those creative avenues to gain that experience. Obviously, there's something very different about, living in a new context and culture. And I think it speaks to your resilience. It speaks to your character. It speaks to your ability to take risks and adapt. And those are real personality traits that I think employers like to see. And so maybe if there's ways for you to gain some of those experiences in other ways and present that to a potential employer, that is good. I also think oftentimes we're on the hustle to find jobs and that security through organizations, but sometimes it might be good to look at your own unique experience and think that you may actually be an expert in something already, and being able to offer that and put that on your resume as a consultant or as an expert can be really helpful. So yeah, just kind of putting that out there. How do we be more creative around this idea of international experience and try and promote other ways of gaining that and embracing that through our hyper-connected virtual world that we have now? I know it's not maybe as exciting for those of us who want to have that experience, but I do think it's essential.
Excellent. Great. At this point, we just wanted to set aside some time and just take some questions from you guys. I'm going to start, if you don't mind, with two questions that we saw submitted beforehand for our panelists to take. The first question is how to work as an expat in international development for a Western organization. And I think they expanded a little by saying what skills, education, etc., are necessary to be competitive. Do any of you want to take that? Ooh, looks like no.
Well, just to say, I think we've talked a lot about degrees. I found the same, that it was really important to have a master's degree, Shannon, when entering the field. That tends to be the new baseline, I think, for people working internationally. It's tough because it's the lowest return on investment as a master's degree. So I would definitely encourage you to be creative. I know, Sharon, I don't know if you were paid for your PhD or had to pay for it, but that's one avenue, that people can go. Some organizations will also pay for that degree. But again, if you are taking some time right now to build out some of your more technical skills, that's a great way to set yourself up for success in lieu of that degree. So I would say that's very appealing to kind of these national, international minded nonprofits. And I would look at the big ones, in addition to the grassroots nonprofit, look at John Snow International, Chemonics. The East Coast tends to have a huge number of these international agencies, and it's typically a work your way up from the bottom approach, getting the entry level position. And a lot of those agencies have the path that you can jump into, starting at entry level and working your way up. So that's one way. And then, building out those connections through what Sam said, those, informational interviews, staying in really good touch, seeing who you might know through the university and social networks that you already have, and cultivating those. We tend to hire people we know or people that are referred to us, just because it in some ways it's easier, but having that vote of confidence through social networks is really helpful. And I think Peace Corps is very similar. So often I've seen that Peace Corps it's almost like a trusted network. If you've been in Peace Corps and other people in Peace Corps, again, entering into some of those bigger, more highly networked organizations can be really helpful.
Excellent. We have one more question that was submitted beforehand, which is, how will international development work likely change due to COVID? Anyone want to take that one? Sam, looking at you.
Well,
I'll just admit that was me.
Okay. But I think a lot of the stuff are things that people already mentioned here. You can't really travel right now. So it's much more difficult to get overseas and do the work, which means that people who are already in country, usually nationals of that country, are going to be doing a vast majority of the work. And I think, Shannon, with MTI, first of all, every organization right now is asking the same question, whether it's MTI, whether it's Mercy Corps. Oxfam just laid off 25% of its workforce because of COVID. So everybody is readjusting, and it's not readjusting in ways that are going to make it easier for you to find a job. So I think that's probably, as an international job seeker, that's probably the biggest way it's going to change your ability to find a job, is that there are less jobs, and you're less able to connect with those jobs because you can't go to the places where they are. So, and that's not great. So, the best thing that I think people can do right now, they're looking for jobs, or a good way to take this time, is to really try to inventory everything that you have to offer, and in a very serious and in a very realistic way. And then look at what you think that international community is looking for, and figure out where you need to fill in the gaps, or where you have expertise that they need, and then promote that. So, ultimately, I say that. A couple other things that just sort of, I was thinking of, there are a number of fellowships out there, Fulbright fellowships, which work both directions. They bring people from overseas to the US, but there's both teaching, I guess, sending Americans overseas, mostly teaching fellowships, Niels, right? Is that?
And research as well.
What's that?
Research as well.
And research as well, yeah. So there's Fulbrighters out there who are in lots of different countries. I think I've met Fulbrighters in every country I've worked in. So those are not rare jobs or rare opportunities. And if you spend a year as a Fulbright in a country, you meet a lot of people. And the other thing I would just say is meeting people. So much of this is not what you know, it's who you know. And having that network is, as Ashley pointed out, they hire people who get recommended to them mostly, because they can rely on the people that are recommending to at least have some semblance of knowledge of who they're recommending, and trust them to not recommend somebody who's not going to work out. So yeah, it's who you know, and so you need to create that larger network, and that does mean interviewing a lot, and a lot of informational interviewing. And the other thing is, they say, is looking for a job's a full-time job. And so if, maybe the 1 and 2 interviews a week need to be more. That's none of that's probably information that it's either a surprise or that you really want to hear, but try to be honest and say that it's a difficult time and it takes a lot of work. And COVID makes it even more difficult and means you need to do more work. Sorry for being a pessimist.
But all really good points nonetheless. Yeah. And use GlobalPDX is another good thing you can use us. We're here to help. I'd love to open it up, again, acknowledging we're going to go over time. If you have to leave, that's all right. But I'd love to open it up for questions from you guys. Anything that came to mind during this conversation.
Just to say, I'm really sorry I have to jump off, but one other plug I want to put in quickly is the field of planetary health, which is a new field. It's really the convergence of public health and conservation. And a lot of organizations and universities are getting behind this, particularly with the emphasis on climate change and the impact on, biodiversity and human health. But I think that that field is expanding. And so, there's lots of really good job boards for that field. There's lots of really good research and information. And the Planetary Health Alliance out of Harvard is a really good resource. And then, just to say, look, for Portland, for me, the GlobalPDX has been the best resource. The social events are awesome. The people connected to it are fabulous. I think the B Corps community is highly aligned to GlobalPDX as well. And so you have this nice interface of kind of corporate, socially responsible organizations locally who also have this focus on international work. So also putting my plug in for GlobalPDX. So sorry to jump off. So nice to connect with you all and make some friends during this pandemic. And I look forward to staying connected. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Take care.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Are you guys, any questions that just came up organically that you'd love to ask now?
So maybe it's a question for Ted, but you're working as a foreign service officer when you're in. Are you in Jakarta at the embassy, or you said the consulate?
I'm in Surabaya in Eastern Java.
Okay, interesting. The house I'm staying in at the moment is the former consul general from Surabaya, is a very old friend of mine. Looks like probably something Indonesian behind my head, I think.
Yes, I was noticing that.
But now that you're doing that job, you're talking to two, retired foreign service officers here. Is there any interest in making that a career?
The chief of the section certainly has been putting the pressure on me to look at it. He's
nice to be welcome.
Yeah, it was. He's a great mentor. He's a young guy. I think his third tour. So he's in his career, up and at 'em, and he's PCSing to DC this summer whenever that actually ends up happening. So. But yeah, he's looking at definitely those career steps in terms of the Foreign Service on how to continue his trajectory upwards so that he can get to where he wants to go. And I've had a lot of conversations with different Foreign Service officers in Jakarta, people that are entry level, mid-level, and even senior officers. And it's interesting because everyone has their own style, their own take on. There are those that are totally career driven and are looking for their, DCM job or their ambassadorship if they are ever so fortunate. But then there are a lot of people that are just happy to do one thing, and that's the area that they want to stay in and kind of focus their time, even though they know career-wise maybe it's not gonna take them all the way to the very top, but it's just something they want to do. But then there are other people that have families, and all their career decisions are all revolving around their family, and what that means, in the terms of where they bid to go to their next post and that sort of thing. It's all about the schools that they can get their kids into and those sort of things. So I'm really surprised at the really wide variety of people that are in the careers that they're choosing in the Foreign Service. So it's not just this, drive to be an ambassador someday.
So Ted, you're in Surabaya, and Jennifer, you're in Jakarta when you're in Indonesia. Is that how it works?
No, actually, the Peace Corps office is in Surabaya, which is unusual for a Peace Corps program to be based not in the capital. So,
Okay.
yeah, so we're actually fortunate because the mission in Indonesia is the 7th largest in the world. And Jakarta, as you know, is just a huge city. And so while Surabaya has only about 2 million people, it's still a big city.
Yeah.
And so we still get the fun and the chaos of it, but we're fortunately not in Jakarta.
And your volunteers are in a lot less trouble that way.
Yes, that's part of why I'm so happy about being in Surabaya. It's a very business-oriented, non-touristy
Yeah.
place, so there's not a lot of trouble they can get into, especially in the largest Muslim nation in the world. Not a lot of partying going on in my country, at least.
not that you know of.
Yeah, not that they're telling you.
Yeah, well, that's always true, right?
And they never leave their sites either, right?
Yeah, well, actually, that's definitely not true, but but it's hard to drink when it's such a social faux pas, really, in so many places. So I feel like I've been really lucky. We were in the Gambia for 3.5 years before Indonesia, so we've been in Muslim countries for the last 6 years. So my job has been much easier because of that in many levels.
When were you in the Gambia? When were you in Banjul?
2014 to basically end of 2017. Ted was there a few months left.
Yeah, we were the ones that were sending all the migration up to Europe. We were the ones.
No, Pat Alsup is a good friend of mine. So.
Oh, is that right? Yes, we know Pat very well.
She was probably my best boss.
Oh, that's
so
it's a small world. See, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Very small world.
No, I know.
But you've all had such interesting careers. It's it's always fun to meet people who have such a diverse array of experiences in so many different cultures. I'm curious to know, for the two of you, is it Sam and Niels? You're now back in Oregon. How does that compare with the life of travel and adventure that you've had in the Foreign Service? Are you enjoying the shift?
I sure am. I mean, it's I put it in my holiday letter. I hope to travel less in 2020. Well, I kind of overshot the mark, but but no. I mean, I felt like we lived all over the world in great places. 7 years in Australia before we came back, and for example, which is a pretty awesome place. I'm sure you've been down. I'm guessing you've been down during your time in Indonesia.
I actually did my master's degree in Sydney.
Okay, well, I lived in Sydney on Coogee Beach for the last 4 years, and my last assignment as a FSO was as consul general there. So I had a pretty nice house in Double Bay. So this was not difficult. But at one point my wife just looked at me and said, "Well, like, all things have to end at some point. When is this one going to end?" And like, you're right. Let's just go home. We bought a house and in Portland, and it's. I think it's been great. We have 4 daughters who are spread around the planet, so we have lots of reasons to try these days to stay in touch and hope that someday we're actually going to be together. But when you raise your kids in the Foreign Service, there's a certain amount of likelihood that they're not coming. They don't even know where home is, so how are they going to go home? So there you go. Sam, what's your take?
So yeah, my career is a little different from Niels. I'm more of the second two categories that Ted that you had mentioned. For myself, I'm a consular coned officer, but I have probably done less consular interviews than 95% of the Foreign Service, and only did basically a tour and a half as a consular officer. Spent a lot of time working for PRM as refugee coordinator, 6 years doing refugees, and another 3 years as the regional environment, science, technology, and health officer for West and Central Africa. So I did all of these regional jobs, which involved me being in the field much more than any of my colleagues. If I wasn't traveling a couple times a month to go to refugee camps, or to go travel through West Africa or Central Africa to go to game reserves, or to do a project in one form or another, I was feeling antsy. But then my wife and I adopted 2 kids. We spent the first 8 years or so with those kids overseas and decided that we needed to have something a little more settled for them to grow up in, that give it being sort of an adoptive family, and that we wanted them to have a solid base that they could call home. So, and the other thing was because of the decisions I made in my career to not work in my cone and to never go back to Washington, that tends to
career suicide.
upward mobility. And I could have stayed in for probably another 5 years, but it was time to come back. And we'd always maintained a lot of connections with Portland. And this is, if I'm going to be in the U.S., I want to be in Oregon. And we're, lucky enough to have nice places to go in Oregon and have a lot of friends here. So it was easy to come back. I've got a number of friends overseas who I would love to see again. Jennifer, you must know Dee Hertzberg as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Dee is a good friend of mine from Ethiopia, actually.
Oh, that's so
where
funny.
She was working for JHU, I think, at that point, or Chipago. But then, she ended up with Peace Corps and now has gone on to working as a consultant. But it is it's a great career. I had a fantastic time. I did things that I would never have done otherwise, met people I never would have met otherwise. But it was time to come home, and we came home, and things are working out okay. The other thing about that is, and Jennifer and Ted, you'll sort of understand this, but you talk about how you bid. The first question we asked ourselves when we were bidding our next post is where my wife could work. And so that's why we ended up doing 3 tours in Africa in a row, as opposed to, they tell you not to do that for career purposes, but we did 3 tours of Africa in a row, because that's how Jennifer, who's got a master's in public health and works for Medical Teams International, like Shannon as well. That was just how we decided where we were going to go, and she was able to create quite a good career doing that, because public health is always needed in certain regions.
How long were your foreign service careers?
20. Mine was 20 years.
Mine was 33.
Impressive.
See, that's and all the people that got off already, those were the people that I was really hoping were going to stay on, because I was like, this is what you're talking about. This is how you look for maybe a single organization that can carry you through your career and give you that diversity of experiences, that opportunity to live in different parts of the world and experience a lot of different, like you guys were saying, lots of different opportunities to work with.
Did you write down booster?
Booster.
I think you're talking to somebody else, Sharon, yeah?
Oh.
Oh, shoot. I actually do want to say, I do need to get off the phone, partly because my internet keeps shutting down. I don't know why, but it's been very inspirational and enlightening to talk with all of you and hear about your careers. It's really neat, really impressive. So I hope to see you again and learn more from you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciated having you.
Okay, take care. And I'll send you an email, Jennifer.
Great.
Good
Take care.
luck.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, I'm certainly happy to keep hosting this fantastic conversation where we can let everyone go and maybe try to reconvene again. I would be remiss if I didn't catch you, Jennifer and Ted, before I let you go and say, we would love to have you guys share your experience more. I feel like you have so much to say and so much to offer. So if you guys would ever like to do one of these virtual sessions that we host and just share your experiences, we would love to have you. So please keep us in mind if you're feeling like you have some free time. I'm sure both of you are pretty busy, but we'd love to incorporate you into our virtual session schedule.
Yeah, thank you. Please do. I'm not sure how long we'll be in Oregon. That's a big question right now.
Normally we're not. Usually here, I signed up for the PDX email newsletter, so I get it all the time, and I'm always like, okay, we're going home for R&R. Maybe we're going to be able to go to a meetup at one of the breweries, but it never seems to work out with our schedule. So it was really convenient that we've been evacuated. That will not convenient.
So convenient.
I was going to say, Ted, I think you're being a little optimistic there.
Well,
actually, we're enjoying
optimism
being
was when my wife said, "Oh, we'll be back by June. We're going to definitely go back," and I'm like, I don't think so.
I don't know if those were my exact words. I think I was trying to be optimistic at the time, but we'll be around for a little while. So please do
Yes,
keep
it
us in
doesn't look
mind.
like we're going to be heading back to Indonesia anytime soon. So we'll be definitely around.
But thank you. It's been really nice to meet some new people and to hear about your inspiring careers as well. It only underscores my belief that actually working in different places around the world and experiencing different cultures and people is certainly a way to challenge yourself and grow as a person, and to hopefully implement some positive things in concert with, you know, the people that are there on the ground actually already doing it. So I really appreciate the chance to get to know all of you. Thanks.
Jennifer, did you've done more than just Peace Corps overseas, though? Yeah, it sounded like, yes.
Yeah. So my career has really been more with NGOs than it has been with federal government. You know, you were mentioning adoption. I worked for 4 years for Holt International Children's Services out of Eugene, and
that's who we used for our.
Okay, see, again, small world.
Small world, wow.
I was the program director for South and Southeast Asia, so I had 5 countries that I traveled in. So that was an interesting mix of being based in the U.S., but traveling a good portion of the time overseas to Asia. But yeah, it's I feel like I've been really fortunate in that I didn't plan to end up with the federal government, but it's actually been an interesting piece for me in my career.
Okay. Jennifer at GlobalPDX, I'm just saying right now, you can put my name down for people to contact me if they want to, my email address. And if you need to send me like a questionnaire to fill out so that there's some information to provide, I'll be happy to do.
Thank you so much. I think that's going to be so helpful, and that's going to be one of the things that we're going to really try to develop through COVID, because I think that's what people needed right now, and we maybe were a little slow to get that produced, but now I think is definitely the time to create a really strong list of resources that people can use no matter what their questions are, and GlobalPDX can be a great way to facilitate that. All right, you guys, I think I'm going to close this down, but I've been so appreciative of all of you sharing. And please don't be surprised if any of you get some communications from either Shannon or Deanna, who had to leave early, because I'm sure they had some questions that we didn't really have time for. But I really appreciate you.
Can I ask Niels, where are you, Niels?
I'm in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
I'm coming back this afternoon. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't tell anyone though.
I won't. I was going to see if you wanted to come over for a COVID cocktail in the backyard at some point soon.
Wow.
Okay, let's follow up on that.
Okay.
If you were in Indonesia, you'd have to have a negative COVID test result in order to cross the border.
We can probably get a test too.
Yeah, there you can just buy the certificate, the negative certificate online and print it out.
Good to know.
All Jennifer, right, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Be in touch soon. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Right,
good luck, everyone.
Nice.